I'm excited to talk to you guys about carb counting today. It can get a little bit, I don't want to use the word complicated, but it can get a little bit detailed. So I tried to keep this as basic as possible, a good overview. There's always more that we can learn, but I want to just kind of keep this as simple as possible so that, people leave here feeling like they learned something rather than walking away feeling confused. When we talk about carb counting, where it really started from is really for people who have diabetes. So when we talk about carbohydrate counting, it's kind of adapted into like a way to kind of for weight management, weight loss over the time, just because science and studies have shown that kind of stabilizing our blood sugar and watching out for our blood sugar and not spiking too high or too low too quickly can actually help with weight loss, weight maintenance, things of that sort, weight management. So what is high blood sugar? So that's kind of really where carb counting starts from. So what is high blood sugar? This refers to an abnormally high amount of sugar, also called glucose. So glucose, anytime you see the word glucose, that's another word for sugar, for blood sugar in the bloodstream. So when blood sugar levels are consistently too high, there are very dangerous long-term complications. And usually that first complication will lead to diabetes. And diabetes obviously has a whole list of other complications that are associated with that. But that first complication typically will be diabetes. What causes high blood sugar? Our bodies break down food into glucose that is released into the bloodstream, and glucose in the bloodstream increases our blood sugar levels. So usually what happens then is when we have most foods really cause an increase in our blood sugar. But then something called insulin, which is a hormone that's released by the pancreas, this is usually released into our bloodstream to then take out or to lower that blood sugar. But what happens is that sometimes either our body doesn't respond normally to insulin or no insulin is actually released at all and the blood sugars remained high. And the difference, whether or not the pancreas releases the insulin or no insulin is released at all, is really what the difference between type 1 diabetes is and type 2 diabetes is. So type 1 diabetes is usually where no insulin is released at all from the pancreas, and type 2 diabetes is just insulin resistant, not responding well to insulin. So it's keeping our blood sugars fairly high. So we talk about carbohydrate counting now. So we spoke about high blood sugar. We spoke about, what's keeping it high. So what can we do for somebody who has diabetes or who has consistently high blood sugars? There's a few different things that we can do to manage them. And one of them is medication. So the things like metformin is probably one of the most popular diabetes medications out there. There's insulin therapy, right? So actually injecting ourselves with an insulin. People have these glucometers that actually measure our blood sugar and then are giving us insulin automatically as soon as it reaches a higher level. So really depending on what our diabetes looks like, it's very, very individualized. Each person has, I guess, like blood sugar history, and depending on, what that looks like, their doctor would recommend different types of management. And then some people can manage their diabetes or their high blood sugars pretty well using just diet alone. So that's where we talk about carbohydrate counting. So who is it for? So it really can be used for everyone, but mainly for people with diabetes. But the reason that I say it can be used for everyone, there's a lot of research that supports that kind of normalizing and stabilizing our blood sugars can help tremendously with weight loss and just with weight management in general. So it's become adapted as almost a diet, or not even a diet, just a sustainable lifestyle as it pertains to nutrition and health. So why do we use carbohydrate counting? So it's a method used to manage blood sugar without eliminating any foods from the diet. And it really, really focuses on portion control, and that plays probably the biggest role in carbohydrate counting. So I speak to a lot of people, and they're always telling me, I can't lose weight, I'm eating really well. And so I'm going to talk about it now in terms of the weight loss side of it, right? And not the diabetes side of it. But I'm eating really well. I don't really understand. Why am I not losing weight? And the reason for that is because people are not following portion sizes properly. So the USDA, which is the United States Dietary Association, they put out guidelines that help us with portion sizes. So it helps us with portion sizes for all of our macronutrients, which are the proteins, fats, and carbs. And it also puts out guidelines for things like sodium and sugar intake and things of that sort. So carb counting essentially is using the carbohydrates guidelines as a way to help us normalize our blood sugar. And the guidelines, by the way, were probably made based on, the studies behind what our blood sugar looks like when we eat certain portion sizes. So it's kind of what came first, the chicken or the egg. So we don't know if those guidelines came first, but more likely they came from studies showing what does blood sugar look like after, consuming these carbohydrates. So why is portion control involved? So it involves eating a healthy amount of the foods that you would normally eat, but it's helpful, like I said, for weight management. It prevents overeating, but it also helps with blood sugar regulation, specifically when we talk about carbohydrates. So portion control is really, really important. I'm actually going to go away from carbohydrates for a second, and I'm going to talk about just why portion control is important. And I'm going to use an avocado as an example because I think an avocado is a really, really great example. According to the USDA guidelines, a serving size is a quarter of an avocado. Most people are eating a lot more than a quarter avocado. And they're saying, I'm eating avocado. It's healthy. It's a healthy fat. And it is a healthy fat. It's a great healthy fat. But it is still a fat. It is still high in calories. So we're getting good nutrients from there. We're getting these good healthy fats, but we're still getting calories. So if we're eating an entire avocado, we're getting a lot of calories out of that avocado. So it's important for us to know, okay, a quarter of an avocado is a serving size. That might be too little for most people, but just know that when you're having a third of the avocado, that's going to be a little bit more than the serving size. But if we're eating a whole avocado, that's going to be a lot more than the serving size. So it's important for us to know what these serving sizes look like. There are different apps that tell us the serving size. You can look on Google. You can quickly type in Google, what's the serving size of an egg? What's the serving size of a bagel? What's the serving size of, squash, things like that, of, rice. So rice is another good example, right? So a serving size of rice is a third of a cup of rice. Most people in their meals are eating more than a third of a cup of rice. So it's important to just know that we're eating more, but how much more are we actually eating? And when we follow serving sizes, or we're more cognizant, I should say, even if we're not following it, but we know how much over the serving size are we going, it really, really can help us, just eat healthier in general and really just feel better. We don't feel as stuffed. And B, it really can help with weight loss, and it really can help with this blood sugar regulation. So what is blood sugar regulation? So blood sugar regulation, so it refers to keeping our blood sugar levels within normal range, but we don't want it to go above and we don't want it to go too below, because hyperglycemia is when our blood sugars get too high. And there are certain symptoms that are associated with hyperglycemia, but there are also certain symptoms that are associated with hypoglycemia, like feeling really lethargic and tired and dizzy. Sometimes people, when they don't eat enough throughout the day, they feel almost like they're having a panic attack. And it's really because their blood sugar has gotten way, way too low and they've become hypoglycemic. And hypoglycemic can be very, very dangerous in people who have diabetes, right? It can become very, very dangerous. They can pass out. It's very important that people who do have diabetes keep like apple juice or a box of raisins or something that has a specific amount of carbohydrates. And we'll talk about that in a second, a specific amount of sugar that can help quickly raise their blood sugar. So a lot of people typically, like I said, have like raisins or some sort of dried fruit or a box of apple juice. They keep it nearby, or they make these like little sugar tablets. Keep it nearby, something that's very full of sugar, but a specific amount that will help raise their blood sugar very, very quickly. But even people who do not have diabetes, they also don't want to, be hypoglycemic. So it is important that we're eating regularly throughout the day, whether it be, 3 relatively nice sized meals and 2 or 3 snacks, or we want to have like 6 smaller meals, which are essentially like 6 snacks. A little bit bigger than snacks, I should say. So what are carbohydrates? We say are one of the 3 macronutrients, right? So we have fats, carbohydrates, and protein. And carbs are found mainly in grains, starchy vegetables, things like squash, fruits, dairy, legumes, and sugary foods. So a lot of people say, oh, I'm not eating carb. But what they're really saying is they're not really eating like processed carbs. They're not eating bread. They're not eating pasta, but they're probably eating starchy vegetables. They're probably eating fruit. They're probably eating yogurt. And maybe they're eating legumes or not. But they may be not eating, like simple carbohydrates and even some of these like bread types of carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates. So how is carb counting done? So there are 2 ways to do it. So Carb counting is very easy when we have a packaged food, right? Because it tells us exactly how many carbohydrates we have in specific foods. One carbohydrate is equal to 15 grams. Okay, so let's keep that in our head. 15. If you see something has less than 15 grams of carbohydrates, if it's like 13 or 14, we'll kind of round that to the 15. But if it's less than that, it's usually not really high in carbohydrates or relatively low in carbohydrates. One slice of bread is equal to 15 grams of carbohydrates. That third of a cup of rice that we spoke about before, that's equal to 15 grams of carbohydrates. So that's one carbohydrate. So when we see this nutrition label, so you see the one right here, we see total carbohydrates is 37 grams. So 37 grams is a little bit more than two carbohydrates, right? Because 30 grams would be two carbohydrates. So that would be two slices of bread would be 30 grams of carbohydrates. This is a little bit more than that. So it's just important to know whatever this food is, this is a little bit more. It's closer to three carbohydrates. So it's not low in carbohydrates at all. And we have to be cognizant of that. Okay, we're having three units, let's say, of carbohydrates here, or close to three. Let's say it's 2.5 units of carbohydrates. So let's just keep that in our heads, right? For people who are carb counting, we want to try to have no carbohydrates in snacks. And the meal breakdown, it can look different for everybody, but we want to try to have the least amount in breakfast. So they say about two, not more than three carbohydrates for breakfast. So 45 grams of carbohydrates should be the most for breakfast. I'll give you an example. Let's say we're having eggs. Eggs are a protein. There's no carbohydrates in there. We want to have some toast with that. Let's say that's going to be one slice of bread to have with our eggs. So that's going to be 15 grams of carbohydrates. And then one cup of fruit, which is going to also be one carbohydrate. So another 15 grams of carbohydrates. Those are going to be our two carbohydrates for breakfast, and that's it. That's going to be 30 grams of carbohydrates. Lunch and dinner, we can have about 60 grams of carbohydrates. So we can have more carbohydrates there. But in order to know how many carbohydrates we're getting, we need to make sure that we're following serving sizes, right? So keep in mind also that when we look at the nutrition facts, a serving size is 2/3 of a cup, right? We have to remember it's not going to be an entire package. We have to look what is the serving size and how many carbohydrates are in that serving size. So that's essentially carb counting, right? We have the 15 grams of carbohydrates is 1 unit of carbohydrate. Breakfast, we want to have between 30 to 45. Lunch, dinner, closer to 60 grams of carbohydrates. So obviously, not every food comes perfectly packaged, right? For things like that, you can use the internet or other like online resources for an estimate. So you can always look up how many carbohydrates are in an apple, right? And you could look that up. It's about 25 grams. Usually this includes fruits and vegetables. There are rules of thumb, right? Like a small apple is equal to 1 gram of carbohydrates. A medium apple is that 25 grams. It's a little bit more. A larger apple can have even more than that. I always like to say Google is definitely going to be your best friend with this. But again, if you got like a book or one of those apps, yeah, so Google, looking on the internet, and then just following like rules of thumb for like fruits and vegetables and things like that. Just following a cup of fruit. Starchy vegetables is also, I think it's 1.5 cups of starchy vegetables. Things like cucumbers are called free foods, right? There's no carbohydrates in them. There's zero. Even avocado, it's high in fat, but there's no carbohydrates. So as it pertains to carbohydrates, that's a free food, but we still, for calorie purposes and for weight loss purposes, we still want to know what the serving size is for that. So just keep that in mind. When we think about carbohydrates, it could be a free food, but it doesn't mean there's no calories in there. So just keep that in mind. So carb counting for blood sugar regulation. So eating foods that are high in carbs or foods that contain only carbs can cause blood sugar spikes, very, very high blood sugar spikes. Knowing carb counts help us eat balanced meals on a consistent basis, and that can help us just feel better, have more energy, and this helps to prevent blood sugar spikes. And by the way, feeling that energy is really when our blood sugar is regulated nicely. Sometimes, and I remember when I was my dietetic internship, I worked with a woman who did the night shifts. I think it was at an orphanage, and she was doing the night shift, had a horrible, horrible diet. And she was just trying to get through these night shifts. And she would have just chocolate bar after chocolate bar to try to keep her up. And she just felt the sugar was keeping her up. And then by the end of the night, she just fully crashed. And what was happening is that she was getting this high because she was having so much sugar. So her blood sugar went up so much, but then she just crashed down because there were no nutrients, there was no protein, there was no fiber, there was nothing to help stabilize that blood sugar. So it was just taking this crazy crash. And essentially, she put on a ton of weight because of that. It was affecting her sleep. She just wasn't able to concentrate properly. So, just stabilizing our blood sugar can help us just feel better overall. It helps with sleep. It helps us feel better. It gives us more energy and things of that sort. It's a really important thing to note. So, we want to opt for whole foods such as fruits and vegetables and whole grains, because even like fruits, for example, there's carbohydrates in there, but there are other nutrients that help regulate our blood sugar, right? So, a fiber, for example, can help normalize our blood sugar a little bit more. We're not going to have that crazy crash like we will with the chocolate bar, like we see, like these Snicker bars or Kit Kat bars or anything that we see in that drawer. Something else to note is that when we do have like a fruit for a snack, it's really good to pair that with a healthy fat or with a protein. And the reason for that is because that also will help prevent these high spikes and low spikes. So I like to tell people cheese sticks should be your best friend, right? Cheese sticks are great. It's all protein. There's no carbohydrates in there. So I'll tell people you want to have an apple and a cheese stick, or an apple and peanut butter, or a peach and a cheese stick. The cheese stick is that protein that will help prevent these, even though there's fiber in that fruit, the protein will be that extra source that will help prevent our blood sugars from spiking too high and from quickly crashing down. So it's really, really good to make sure that we're pairing with a healthy fat, with a protein. This will again also help with our blood sugar regulation. So, what are some examples of carb counting? So, we have 15 grams of carbs in this one small piece of fruit, right? So, that's a peach. So, a small peach, that's going to be 15 grams of carbohydrates. This plate right here, we have 2/4 cups of rice. So, that's going to be 2 carbohydrates and 1 cup of lettuce. The lettuce is a free food. The chicken is a free food. So, that's going to be 30 grams of carbohydrates. So those are 2 units of carbohydrates. Here we have 60 grams of carbs. So we have 3 small tortillas, a half a cup of beans, and a 1/4 cup of rice. So here is, we're going to have, those 4 units of carbohydrates, right? Because we have the 3 small tortillas, the half a cup of beans, that's also going to have some carbohydrates, and a 1/3 cup of rice, which is going to be that 1 unit, another 15 grams of carbohydrates. So each one of these are going to be 15. So it's going to be half a cup of beans is going to be 15, a 1/3 cup of rice is going to be 15, and the 3 small tortillas are going to be 30. So a 215, so 30, 15, 15. And then the last one's going to be 90 grams of carbs, because that's going to be 2 cups of pasta. So 2 cups of pasta is going to be 90 grams of carbs. So that's going to be a lot of carbs. So that's something we have to realize when we're, making ourselves a pot of pasta. We really want to know what is the serving size, so we know how many carbs we're getting, because that really, really does add up.